To start us off, Taylor, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Cult Collectibles and what it's all about and what people can find on there to purchase and view and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so I'm Taylor James. I started Cult Collectibles years ago, quite a few years ago, as kind of like a just a project for my collecting. I was collecting a lot of Jonestown and Heaven's Gate stuff, and I figured this would be a good way to network and meet some new people who collect. Um, so I started the site, and then at the time I was full time as an eBay reseller. This was kind of my side thing. Uh, as time went on, though, it really gained a lot of momentum, and I ended up not kind of abandoning the eBay or transferring over, I guess, fully to doing this. It was a combination of eBay had taken a couple listings down that I had on there because they were sort of true crime related, and B, it was I was just spending too much time on this because the whole business is just me, right? So uh, I ended up making the site, and yeah, over the years, it's kind of turned into a bigger thing where I've got some books out, some sort of independently published books. I've worked with documentaries. I've gone on a few trips for work. Um, met a lot of interesting people, done some really interesting networking. So all of the side I was going for in regards to networking and building collections and meeting people really worked out. And then at the same time, I was also able to uh, turn this into a job, um, which is sort of a not really the plan in the beginning, but now that it's happened, I really enjoy that I can do this full time.
So, do you feel comfortable talking about the history of murderabilia, like how it all started versus where it is now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the biggest expert, I wouldn't say. I know quite a bit. I've been doing this for quite a while professionally, and I don't think there's that many people who do this as a full time thing. But um, people have been kind of collecting morbid items forever. Back when executions used to happen in public, they would sell parts of the noose. They would sell pieces of the wood from the kind of platforms, and they would get dismantled. The Donner cabin, if you know that kind of historical story, um, pieces of that cabin were sold back in the day. A lot of sort of grim and I guess morbid collectibles have always been a thing. As time went on, kind of serial killers obviously kind of blew up in the 70s and 80s and became a bigger thing. Interest in true crime also has really um, gained a lot of momentum since then. So that sort of changed the market a bit, where people used to kind of look for historical kind of things, and now people are often writing to inmates or trying to collect their art directly from inmates. There have been situations where inmates have had art dealers for them or people that were sort of the middleman to get their things out there. Um, and it went from kind of some stuff on eBay back when it was allowed on eBay to more private sites, and now there's people with Instagram accounts and people with TikToks, even a lot of different people doing a lot of different kind of social media or different, uh, I guess you could say, using different platforms and mediums to sell their stuff and market their stuff. Um, so yeah, it's gone definitely more mainstream now. It's still necessarily not the most popular thing in the world, but it is um, its own subculture, and yeah, I guess that's where we are now. I mean, there's a handful of sites that are doing this full time and doing other kind of true crime related things, and yeah, that's about it. I mean, that's my very short summary. Obviously, there's important people that have been involved in the industry, and there's figures and names that have been impactful, but there's a lot to get into, and sort of a vague thing of, I guess, when as true crime has gotten more popular and more of a mainstream interest, it's become more of an interest for people to collect items relating to cases.
Right. And I know at one point in time, I forget the year, it was like between 2000 and 2007, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was called the Murderabilia Ban Bill or something like that. They were trying to ban murderabilia, and they were unsuccessful. And I don't know if it was in like the Senate or federal court, something like that.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of. There's been some attempts to do that. Um, there have been. There's the Son of Sam law, obviously, where inmates aren't allowed to profit off of their crimes in any way, but that's only in certain states. This is all just speaking for the states specifically. And then, yeah, people were trying to get it banned, but it never really went anywhere. I think it's a bit too vague and a bit too difficult to do because let's say, for instance, on Cult Collectibles, I was only selling paperbacks from inmates, or sorry, paperbacks about true crime, T-shirts people had made, kind of these secondary items, trading cards, and not selling letters. Then would that be allowed? Or say, for instance, I was selling John Wayne Gacy paintings only. He's passed away now. It's been a long time. Would that be okay because he's not around anymore? Or would it be an item to item basis where they had to make sure inmates not making money on the transaction? It's just a lot of. I think there's so many things to it. The way I kind of compare it when people say like, "Hey, isn't this illegal?" or "Are you allowed to do this stuff?" is that I'll tell people, "Yeah, it's legal," and people have had some opposition in the past. But imagine that I went to a garage sale, right, and I found this stuff at a garage sale, and just decided, okay, I'm going to sell this on the internet. How? What? And what? At what point is that illegal for me to just sell some things that I found, right? In the same way that somebody emails me and says, "Hey, I've got this thing for sale that I collected, and I can buy that and sell that." There's no reason why I shouldn't be able to just sell a thing legally that I just purchased from somebody else, right?
Right, right. So before we get into talking about murderabilia and everything, I know you don't want to spend a whole lot of time on the Dahmer collection, but if we could spend like 5 minutes on it, that would be cool. Was that possible?
Yeah, yeah, we can talk about it quick. Basically, this was like one of the bigger projects that I've worked on. I had some people contact me years ago with a bunch of Jeffrey Dahmer things. It was all items that were going to be destroyed and thrown out. They were actively being destroyed when they got in touch, and then they were given permission to do whatever they wanted with the stuff. So I worked with them on uh, a what's the word, consignment sort of basis, where I'm sort of managing the collection for them, which has been very insightful to do because I've been able to find information that wasn't public previously. Been able to work with the documentary production and put a lot of that info out there. A lot of the things that basically everything that I legally could have sort of released um, to kind of show people like, hey, here's information on this case. Maybe this could help with research, or maybe this could be interesting to somebody who's interested in the case. I've been able to release those things, which is kind of cool, I think. And yeah, it's been cool. I mean, I'd say things are sort of winding down at this point, just in regards to um, there were a lot of things to list, and that happened a while ago. There was a big boom of interest in that collection right after the Netflix series came out on Jeff, and now, yeah, it's sort of there's still stuff on cultcollectibles.org, um, but it was just kind of a cool experience to work with such a notable thing. As you probably know, as some people might not know, though, there wasn't really any Dahmer stuff on the market for anybody who was interested in collecting. Um, there were a handful of letters that had been kind of going around in circles between a few collectors for years and years and years, but no uh, significant collection. So it was cool to be able to sort of bring that to the public eye. Um,
What's the website you said again?
it's cultcollectibles.org.
There you go, Kat.
So, I don't know if Amy has any questions about Dahmer, but I'll only ask you one so we don't bore you to death with you repeating yourself over and over. But what are the top three Dahmer items you've either sold or are currently selling or might not be for sale that are in your personal collection?
I mean the glasses are a big one. There's a pair of glasses in a that were sold. Um, there is the urn, of course. Kind of, there's a little bit of ashes in the urn that he his ashes were put in after his death, after his cremation, I should say. Um, The stuff from the documentary is maybe the coolest, but I think is the most interesting. There's a documentary last year, My Son Jeffrey, that used a lot of items from this collection, and which is a very cool experience to be able to work on that, kind of just um, providing um, the video, some video and audio that was used that hadn't been seen before. Being able to sort of bring that to the public is kind of my what I enjoy the most about doing running this website now, and just the whole Cult Collectibles thing in general, is that um, a lot of this stuff would be gone forever. Like I said, stuff was actively being destroyed at the time it was kind of found and brought to me. Um, so a lot of these things nobody would have ever seen them, and there's value to it both from a perspective of from a perspective of historical importance, lost media, I guess you could say, preservation of media, and the other one being, a lot of this stuff could be used for forensics purposes, for research, or for educational purposes. Um, so I think it's very important to kind of, even getting away from Dahmer for a second, there's been a lot of other collections that I've purchased that, um, and some that I'm actually working on right now, which I'm excited to sort of bring to the public once those go through. But there's a lot of things that nobody ever even knew about when it came to high profile cases, or things that people, things that people didn't know about certain cases, things that people haven't seen before. Um, I've kind of always had an interest in lost media in general, and things like that. I've archived a lot of rare Japanese tapes of Om Shinrikyo stuff and other cool true crime things, and yeah, just that kind of archival process. Those are always the coolest items to me, are the pieces that no one's ever seen before, or that have been lost for 25 years, and somebody finds them out in an attic, and they can be shown to the public for the first time.
Right. Yeah, that is pretty interesting that all these like macabre treasures are lost for years or even decades, and then they just pop up one day, like that one collection, supposedly the biggest collection in the world, just popped up with like Rifkin stuff and Manson and so on and so forth. I think the collection I'm talking about. I think it came out of the East Coast.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's similar to, like, comparing it to what you do with Unforbidden Truth, right? A lot of the podcast episodes that you have information about cases that people don't know about at all. For me personally, the Cole Hub episodes and the Wild Bill episodes have super interesting stuff about those guys who are kind of characters in their own right. But um, there's things that you get out of people that nobody's heard before, or that is notable. For obviously recently being on Dr. Phil. Congratulations, by the way, for that shout out. That was very cool.
Thank you.
You're finding kind of lost information, and or new information on a lot of these things, that either a case has been kind of closed for a long time and the person can talk about it now, or various other things. But it's similar to that, I think, a little bit, with just it's important to dig up this new information for things, and I think I think for any case it's interesting, but I think the more kind of widespread and known a case is, the more important it has to have all the history possible on it, for that way people are able to do research and learn from it and study it. And I feel the same way about interviews or new books being written about true crime stuff as I do about preserving any kind of media surrounding this stuff.
So, Amy, before we move on to the next set of questions, do you have anything in regards to the Dahmer collection before we move on?
No. Actually, the only thing I was going to say is the very first time that I ever saw murderabilia for sale, it was actually bricks from his building.
You know
That
what?
was the
Actually, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say that was the very first thing that I ever like came across, and I was like, should I buy that?
Yeah, that was one of the things that I very, very early on, somebody gave me a little piece of that as a gift, I think. And then I purchased a couple. not, no, maybe I didn't purchase any. I had a couple little pieces as a gift. They were just, I think, broken off from the staircase or some part of the building that was still that hadn't been demolished. Um, which I think is um, I mean, it is what it is, part of the thing. When it comes to circle back again for a second, though, sorry to kind of be all over the place, but that's another thing too that has come through the site. I mean, I deal with Dahmer things that aren't necessarily related to that collection. Um, any kind of case. Let's say I had 1,000 items from Richard Demir, as I'm still interested in new items and learning more about the case, right? Um, so the Dahmer stuff, I have had a couple of sets of photos um, that I've been able to sort of archive that hadn't been seen before. One of them were crime scene photos taken after the whole apartment had been cleaned out and sort of scrubbed down by a forensics student. And they're very cool because they're new photographs of the apartment. And the other one was a series of photos that um, were taken of the demolishing of the building. And there's obviously a couple of photos of that out there, but it was a whole set of photos of the building being demolished. And the last one were real estate staging photos of the apartment after it had been. It was the apartment when it was being rented at some point. I'm not sure if that was. I'm not sure if it was rented after his case or if it was rental photos from before his everything that went down with him. I'm not sure if they rented it for a while afterwards before the building was demolished, but yeah, it's another just such another piece of sort of, I guess, lost photographs that had been out there sitting in somebody's dresser or attic for a long time. And I'm lucky enough that every once in a while one of these people who finds these things will contact me, and I get to bring them to the wider audience.
Very cool.
So obviously, murderabilia is a very controversial, hobby, and something that people collect.
Yeah.
I'll ask you something that you probably get asked on a daily or weekly basis, as do I. So how do you feel? Let me word this correctly. How do you feel this impacts the victims? Do you think it's disrespectful in any way? Why or why not? And I'll answer after you do as well.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say I get asked daily. I don't really interact with many people outside of clients, right? The thing with the site, the way I kind of look at it is I would never argue against somebody who is upset about it or offended. I wouldn't argue with somebody for my personal morals, my personal stance on it. I do it because I'm interested in it, and I think at the end of the day, there is positive stuff that comes from finding this new information. Right, it's the only reason I've had access to new information, to things from that go into documentaries, to a lot of things like that, is because of just building this sort of business. Right, so if I want to be able to have the option to find these new things and do this sort of archival work, I have to sort of buy and sell things as I go. Right. Like I said, I wouldn't try and convince somebody, I should be able to do this. I have a right to do this or whatever. If somebody was upset because they were affected in some way, like, I can totally understand that. And all I try and do is just stay out of their way, keep my head down, not upset or offend anybody. I'm not trying to I don't do any advertising, really. I don't do any promotion. I'm not trying to shove this in anybody's face or market it to new people who wouldn't be interested. I'm trying to buy and sell items to be able to then work with larger historical collections or work with documentaries or publishers on the educational side of things. And I also don't have an issue with anybody collecting, right? I have some personal collection as well. I don't have any problem with that. But like I said, I try my best to not, not have arguments with people, not to try and be convincing of anything to anybody. To just, if somebody is upset or offended about something, I'm more than happy having a conversation about it. But I'm not going to be swayed into, I shouldn't be doing this because of their feelings. I wouldn't want to upset anybody in any way or offend anybody. I have no kind of edgy side that's trying to be like this counterculture guy who's like, yeah, look at this dark thing that I do. I'm just trying to do my best to not be involved in any way with people who would be upset, and stay in my own lane, for lack of a better word.
What about with the victims advocates? because the only reason I ask is because I know you're the third person that I've now met who does this. Um, I know Will Harder also, and I've talked to him about it too. And I know that there are some victims advocates who are more outspoken than others.
I mean, I haven't had people contact me too often. Like I said, I'm not doing advertising or promotion. It's sort of the whole idea is that the site's not really falling into the wrong hands. You know, I'm not promoting the site to people who would be upset by it. I get an email every once in a while from people saying, you know, I guess the most common one is, hey, shouldn't this money go to the victims? And for me, it's I understand what people are saying, where they're coming from, but certain things, it's like, for instance, on my desk right here, I've got the video in here. I've got this book, Inside the Cult, right? It's a paperback book that I got at a thrift store about the Waco siege. If I were to sell this for maybe $10 or $15, you know, if money from this was going to victims, it would have happened when the book was first published, right? If I'm doing that now, it would be how much work and how many hours am I going to put in to track down people to give 200 people a share of $15, right? When it comes to letters, obviously, or things that are affecting less people, that could be a bit different. But you know, it's in the same way that the you know, the Dahmer Netflix show isn't paying all the victims out some kind of money because they're referencing Jeffrey Dahmer. Any podcast doing true crime content isn't necessarily giving all their proceeds to a victims fund, and I don't think there's anything wrong with doing it or not doing it, you know, like at all whatsoever. But that is the thing I get asked the most from people, and for me, it's kind of like, as a small business, like just a one-person small business, I'm not making tons of money or anything. Sort of getting by, and then trying to buy more larger collections to get new items, to bring new items out there to people. And you know, if there was a process of I have to track every person down involved with anything to do with anything and try and give them money, I think, you know, I don't think people would be happy to have somebody contacting them saying, hey, here's 40 cents that I made. There's a fraction of this that gets paid out to you because of this. I don't think
Right.
there's, you know, I don't think there's anything wrong with assuming that should be the case, but I also don't think that it was necessarily going to be a helpful thing for me to give very small amounts of money to a bunch of different places all the time. And if I'm doing that, then, you know, I'm running I'm not going to be able to run a business, do this as a business, right? So it's either I don't do anything at all, shut the business down because I'm giving all the money away. I can't really operate as a nonprofit. I have to be able to make money to afford new things. But yeah, I'm rambling on here, but the gist of it is that I understand where people are coming from fully in every side of it, and I just try to not be to not offend people as much as I can, to you know, just keep this stuff away from people who might be upset. And like I said, I'm happy having conversations with anybody, but most of the conversations I've had with people they come with a lot of aggression at first, and I'll try and be polite about everything, and get a lot of negativity, and they don't really go anywhere, unfortunately. Like I said, not that I'm trying to defend certain things, but I'm trying to give my side of certain things and talk about the positives that have come from doing some of this work. And yeah, it's just a little bit at this point, I don't really do interviews or media stuff because a lot of it ends up being negative, and it has been the case with true crime stuff literally forever. With anybody who buys it or sells it or collects it, everybody, even people that deal in oddities or bones or taxidermy, there's a negativity to it. And I try and just be as respectful as I can and just do what I'm doing quietly.
Right. I agree with you 100%. And one thing that kind of rubs me the wrong way about murderabilia is there's certain people, not necessarily victims advocates, but some victims advocates that will go out of the way to find, you know, surviving family members or surviving victims of crimes, that will go out the way to send them posts. At least in my experience with my website that's now defunct, True Crime Auction House, where they'll literally send a post and be like, this person's selling a letter from the person who murdered your, you know, sister, daughter, whatever. And they literally go out the way to try to create some type of trouble with them. And then in return, they get upset. And really, it's kind of hard to find murderabilia on the web unless you really like research and know where to go. You know what I mean? I mean, like your website, you have to literally type in an offender's name in order to, like, say Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer. I mean, not everything pops up right away, and you have
Mm.
pages and pages that you got to scroll through, and that kind of grinds my gears sometimes when people, literally go out of their way to, I would say, hurt victims, or hurt, family members of victims. But that's just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little presumptuous to be offended on somebody else's behalf in regards to anything, without having that person's input. But if that person feels like they're right in what they're doing, then it is what it is. I'm not going to try and I wouldn't attack somebody for necessarily doing that. I can imagine why it's frustrating. But I've had people who have contacted me saying, "Hey, this is something that bothers me, or this is something that's involved with somebody I know, or whatever." And I've taken some things down in the past. I have a box of like my items that just aren't going to go anywhere. I don't want to necessarily destroy things because there's historical value in everything, right? But there are things that I don't necessarily want to sell on the site or have, or somebody's asked about it or been upset about it or caused an issue, and I'm like, yeah, if somebody's reasonable about that, I'm happy to hear that out for sure. But like I said, though, I don't get a ton of that. I'm not really doing much media stuff. I'm not really out there much. I'm, for the most part, just trying to buy physical items, archive new information, sell the physical items to collectors, and it doesn't really go outside of that bubble too often.
Right, right. Yeah. And I mean, like you said before, there's a lot of historical purpose behind collecting, but there are some people that, have shrines to like Richard Ramirez or Jeffrey Dahmer or whatever. But I feel like that's like so far and in between. I mean, I'm in a group on Facebook.
Yes.
I know you are too, where people post kind of weird shrines to different killers, and, to each their own. I'm not going to judge because I'm weird according to people's standards and morals, but I mean, it does happen. And, it's just part of the hobby, I would say, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's people doing it in every single thing that are objectable for, or I guess that are offensive for various ways in every kind of hobby in every kind of anything. So it just is what it is. Like I said, I try and just do my work, uh, do my work. Sorry, I lost my train of thought here. Um, Archive anything important that I come across. I've had a lot of archival stuff come from Japanese media with lost films or documentaries or things like that. I've worked with a lot of that kind of stuff, and I'm just trying to spend every day sort of milking the most education out of a lot of this stuff that there is. Because if you think about it, if you look at a true crime podcast, for instance, there's investigative podcasts, but I would say a larger majority are just informative podcasts where they're kind of telling the same information again. Or the same thing with a new book on true crime, right? It's the same information being published again in a book in a different format, so it's easier to read or easier to understand or a different interpretation of events, right? And that's totally fine to do. But I think that another thing that I sort of get criticism on is there's no like educational value to it, whereas a documentary, for instance, has educational value. And a documentary that's been made that has the same information as a different documentary or a different book isn't necessarily anything new and investigative, but I'm trying to, as often as I can, get new information and find new insights into a lot of these people with the work that I'm doing. So, yeah, like I said, though, I don't get too much flack from people. I try and just have nice conversations if I do get an email or something. But it's a controversial thing. You have to have kind of thick skin to be able to do this sort of thing, right? Same thing with what you do. I'm sure interviewing inmates and talking to people is you have to have some thick skin to. There's people that think it's negative, but there's a lot of people that think there's positives to it. So I just try and stay in the positive side.
Right. You're definitely not going to please everybody. Even if you're doing something so good, somebody's going to have something negative to say about something because, I mean, people just have a difference of opinions, which is totally fine. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I used to work in kitchens and people had a negative opinion about back of house kitchen staff, and there was a lot of some negativity with that and the cultures around that. And then I worked in a factory for a while, and the corporation that it was, there's a lot of negative stuff about that. And then when I was an eBay reseller, people would give me a lot of flack for, oh, you're ripping people off. You're buying something at the thrift store and selling it for more, and that's scamming people that really need the stuff. And this was when I was selling Pokemon cards and retro video games and things that are not necessities, right? And then now that I've come to this is even more of a non-necessity. These are, um, nobody needs any of these things necessarily, but any kind of the educational stuff, I try and archive as best I can and put out there. And anything, uh, I think there's negatives but positives to this and to anything else.
Do you ever come across case files?
Like police files.
Yeah, I mean, like any of their files that, the inmates might have or on their cases.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a few court documents from certain inmates. I've had a lot of these things are people who were like collectors a long time ago would get an inmate to send confidential, not well, maybe not confidential files, but court files or police records and things like that that they had access to, and that information wouldn't necessarily be public to anybody else except for that inmate specifically. Um, I recently bought a collection that has it's on the way right now that has some police records and crime scene photographs and stuff. It was found in a storage unit. Um, I had the same kind of thing happen a few years ago with a somebody locally in my city bought items at an estate sale that belonged to a police officer, and he had some of those things there. So a lot of those things are, I guess, not necessarily confidential, but in the records of a prison or an officer's files, and then eventually get out there publicly. Which a lot of that is informational, and I think there's been a lot of cases where new information has been found when people have reread those reports and things have been reopened and investigated more, which I think can definitely be a positive thing.
I agree with that.
So Taylor, as we know, like different collectibles like baseball cards, autographs, so on and so forth. There's like different gradings and different Beckett guides to price things, and obviously with murderabilia, there's really not any guide to go by. So can you break down how things are valued? With different like killers, type things, handwritten things, initial things, signed things, so on and so forth. Like how murderabilia is valued.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different factors. It's I get asked kind of a bit, how do I judge price on certain things, and it totally depends a piece to piece, right? For instance, sometimes I'll see something on eBay and go, oh, that's a good fit for the site, so I'll pay the eBay price, and then if it's a price that I can afford, and then I know that there might have some more value to it, then I can pick that up and say, oh, there's a little bit of a margin for this item, and there's a cool name to have on the website. When it comes to a lot of collections, let's say I'm buying a Richard Ramirez collection, right? He's one of the more sought after names, but he did write a lot. And I've had a few instances where bought somebody's collection of like 50 or 60 pieces at once of letters and envelopes and drawings. So those are obviously very substantial things to buy all at once. I don't think that most people are equipped to buy a large collection of that. For their personal collection, they might want one or two pieces. So I end up paying up quite a bit for larger collections and then split them up. And then as those sell, I kind of make the money back. That will depend on, A, what I paid for that, and then B, what I paid or what, the name is sort of valued at. I had a collection that was sort of like that with Ted Bundy once, which is far more expensive and it cost me quite a bit more. So I had to have a little bit of a margin for profit, obviously, so I can, upgrade and buy bigger collections and pay the bills and everything. Um, but it really is, it's a matter of comps, right? For collectibles, you have comps. You can go on eBay, or you can go on price charting for looking for retro games. You can go on TCG Player looking for trading card games. Look at the data for the most recent sales because these items are selling all the time, right? With the true crime stuff, they're not necessarily selling all the time. It's a much smaller market, and there's not a lot to look at in regards to sold listings. Um, or if you can find a sold auction or a sold listing, it might be 5 or 10 years old, 15 years old somewhere. So you can't necessarily have all the information, right? Um, so when it comes to pricing things for the site, it is very much based on what I'm paying and what I could theoretically make on that and what kind of margins I need for it. Because I also had to pay customs, shipping, both ways, taxes and fees, a lot of operational stuff for the site. Um, it, it sort of depends. Generally, the best way to kind of assess that is if somebody contacts me and says, "Hey, I have these pieces for sale." Um, let's use Richard Ramirez again for an example, right? somebody contacts me and says, "Hey, I have one Richard Ramirez letter for sale. I paid $200 for it. I'm hoping to get 150." And for me, if I pay 150, I also had to pay the shipping to get it to me. I also had to pay customs, possibly at the border. I'm also paying to ship it back out. I had to take the time to photograph it, put it on the site, all those sort of things. I'm probably going to sell it for 200 as well, and then $50 is probably what I'm losing to fees and tax anyway. So I'm not making any money. So I had to pay a bit less, with any kind of business, right? That's why I prefer to buy higher end items or larger collections. Because if somebody has, you know, 50 letters from Richard Ramirez, I can offer, okay, they'll sell for about this much. This is what I can offer for each one. It comes out to however much. This is what I'm hoping to make on it, what I might make on it theoretically. Uh, and I'll be very clear whenever I'm purchasing any kind of item or collection. Like, this is sort of the margins that I'm hoping for. This is kind of what I think it should go for, based on my experience doing this. But it has been all experience based. You know, at first it was literally just make it up and hope for the best, and now it's very much, doing this for about 4 or 5 years. I have a little bit more knowledge of what's higher end, what's lower end, um, and you know, I had to take into account also a lot of this stuff sits with me for years and years and years before somebody's interested in it, right? Because it's just a specific hobby. Um, so yeah, sorry for the long answer, but yeah, it is really dependent on, um, it is really dependent on what people are willing to pay, what I'm paying for things, how important the case is, you know, a lot of different things like that.
Right, right. So what are some more? So what are some more of the like sought after names and like types of items? You know, like artwork. You know, different autographs, so on and so forth.
Well, the number one thing, I guess, in regards to, if you were to, let me try and, sorry, 1 second. I'm trying to take some little notes here so I can remember what we're going over exactly and give you some best answers here. The number one thing I think that people know of for murderabilia and true crime stuff are the John Wayne Gacy paintings, right? The Pogo the Clown painting specifically is so iconic. It's been on album covers. It's been on books. Um, it's been talked about by celebrities. Celebrities have owned them. Gacy paintings. It's a very notable image. All his paintings in general are very popular. That's the most well known one, obviously. Um, it's also something that is, you know, there are some forgeries out there, and you have to have somebody who really knows what they're doing to kind of figure that out. But that's an issue with anything in any kind of collectibles industry. But yeah, the Gacy paintings specifically are higher up items in collecting. If people are new to it, it's sort of, it tends to be one of the pieces where, like, oh, I have to get a Gacy painting for my collection, right? Um, Richard Ramirez, Bundy, and Dahmer are big names. When it comes to older cases, stuff like Richard Speck is popular. Ed Gein, Albert Fish, H. Holmes, but those are very, very hard to find items from. Um, Hard to authenticate items because of the long history of those things. But all the big names that you would think, honestly, are the popular cases. BTK, Ed Kemper, anybody in, or Charles Manson, Jonestown. If you're looking at cults, Heaven's Gate. The big names tend to be the most popular and the most collectible, and then when people get more into it, I find people that are more seasoned with collecting tend to want more unique pieces from smaller names or unusual cases or things that aren't as popular or notable.
Right. The more, yeah, yeah, the more affordable things, definitely. I mean, I've had that experience with a lot of people in the past. Like, I have $100. What do you have to offer me? And you know, like Jablonski, you know, here and there, you know, like different little names that are still collectible nonetheless. And I mean, not every collector is gonna be able to shell out tens of thousands of dollars for Gacy paintings or Ed Gein and so on and so forth. You know.
Tens of thousands?
Well, with a guy like uh, Ed Gein, it's, you had to imagine how old that case is, how popular it is. It inspired the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It inspired Psycho. It's inspired a ton of things. And there's nothing really out there, unless you had direct access to the psychiatric facility. Aside from little pieces from his yard of fencing or brick, little pieces of his tombstone that have been chipped off, there isn't really much there. Um, it's rare, but there are items that go extremely high in this industry. Ted Bundy's bug, for instance, I'm sure is very expensive. A recent one was the door from Sharon Tate's house. Uh, was just sold for $127,000, which was some kind of auction. It was like 40 bidders. They thought it was going to go for maybe 4,000. It a very unique one because that was not expected to sell for that high. There was a public auction of Unabomber items, including his hoodie and sunglasses, his typewriter. A lot of those things went very high and went into private collections. There's almost like a second level of these true crime and murderabilia things for like the really, really high end people, or people who spend a ton of money for certain items, but they're not necessarily going to just show up on some website like mine. They're much bigger things.
Interesting.
So Taylor, do you have anything within arm's reach that you can show that might be, interesting, whether it be high profile or not, just to give a little like educational background on them?
Yeah, I got some stuff on the desk. I have a big sort of inbox area of things that are coming in at all times, that need to be sorted. But let me take a look here because there's a few neat things.
While you're doing that, I have a question.
Oh, please, yeah, go ahead.
It's for both of you.
Yeah.
If you could get your hands on one thing, no restrictions whatsoever, what would be like the one thing on your wish list?
I don't know, Hornets Wagner rookie card. They're worth millions of dollars.
A
Uh,
what?
a Hornets Wagner rookie card. It's an extremely expensive baseball card. I mean, I
Oh,
assume you're talking about true crime stuff, but
true crime.
it's one of those things. I don't collect too much personally anymore. For me, the collecting is like kind of the information, right? I have a lot of things saved in files, so I have a lot of things digitally that are very cool, kind of unseen things. Um, Physical items, I've never really had like a goal piece. I used to have, well, I used to want like, oh, I want a piece by Ted Bundy, and then I got some Bundy things, or I wanted to find some Issei Sagawa paintings, and I found some of those. Almost everything that I've really been interested in, I've been able to get from the site at some point. The one thing that I really always thought was kind of neat was uh, the Om Shinrikyo, the Japanese cult. They had these electroshock helmet things that they would wear to meditate, and I've seen one of them on auction in Japan, but I think it went for about $3,000, and it was something that a lot of things I'll buy with the intention of keeping it for a little bit and reselling it eventually. Um, this one where I didn't really have any profit because it's a sort of a smaller case out here. It's got less interest, and a lot of things. A big hard thing to kind of differentiate for starting out was my interest in something isn't necessarily going to reflect
Public
my
interest.
client. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's not necessarily a safe investment. But yeah, that Om Shinrikyo helmet was one of the most unique ones that I'm sad I missed out on.
Yeah, and for me, I'm obsessed with the Narcos Satanicos case, and I talk to Sarah Aldretti like weekly. And this may sound very, very morbid, but I would love to own the gun that took the life of Adolfo Constantino, just because it's like a huge piece of history, and not many people actually know about that case. And I always tell people to look up on it because it's like kind of like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but like in Mexico because they found human teeth, bones, skulls, and a cauldron filled with supposed like spirits, and they were literally SAing men to death, drug dealers, so on and so forth, to bind their souls and spirits to animals and objects and so on and so forth. I can go on that about that case forever because that case is just so crazy to me, and that's like serial killer slash cult related, and it's kind of rare, right, to have both of those like combined, and especially in that that shape and form of what they exactly were doing.
Interesting. So then would you
Um,
say that she's the most interesting person you've met too?
Uh, I would think so. Yeah. I said Sarah Aldretti, the La Bruja. Yeah, she's definitely by far the most interesting person I've ever spoke to. Unfortunately, she doesn't speak much about her crimes because she's trying to get out of prison. But there's an American case in which is what got them all caught up. So they say if she's ever released from a Mexican prison, they'll extradite her to the U.S. to stand trial for the murder of Mark Kilroy, who was an American student who was kidnapped from Brownsville, Texas, which is a super interesting case in itself. People should look into that if they haven't heard of it, because yeah, the Narcos Satanicos is like what nightmares are made out of, and not even Hollywood could come up with something as twisted as what they were doing.
Hmm, I'll have to check it
so
out.
I got a couple things here. Um, to show off quickly. Um, this first thing is this is kind of a neat one. It's sort of true crime adjacent. This is an original photograph of Bud Dwyer. Um, he famously um, was a treasurer of Pennsylvania who was involved in some kind of fraud, I believe, and he famously took his life at a press conference that was being broadcast live on TV, and then that video ended up sort of making the rounds as it was in um, the Faces of Death series or Traces of Death, I believe, in a lot of shockumentary series. It kind of became a big shock video on the internet, and that's something that is a little sort of related to true crime. Um, who is the is Jody his name? The guy that was kidnapped, Andrew, and then
Yeah.
Yeah, Jody
um,
Poche. Yeah,
yeah, it's similar. This case is sort of similar to that to me, where it's not necessarily directly a true crime case. I mean, that obviously had a true crime aspect to it, but this one, there's other things that go along with it. There's his that video of him obviously became a big thing in the same way that the video of with Gary became a big thing. Um, so yeah, I mean, I just step out of true crime stuff sometimes. I don't specifically just do that, but there are other things there. Um, this is, let me just double check here.
We just did an interview with Jody last week.
Yeah, that's why it was fresh on my mind. I remember seeing that. Um, this is a letter from uh, Tex Watson, or a card, I guess, from Tex Watson from the Manson family, um, who was, I think he was a big part of the Tate murders. This is from 1981, which is kind of cool. I think he's still alive now, but there's a lot of pieces online. A lot of letters and stuff are sort of more recent because people will be writing somebody for a few years, get sick of the hobby, and sell all their stuff. So it's I don't see 80s stuff too often, but this is back when somebody was collecting um, back in the day, back before my time of the true crime involvement. This is something that's just on the desk here. I have a big pile of things that I need to publish, or sorry, I need to put on the site um, that I haven't had a chance to get to yet. Um, this is another thing here too. I'll show off. It's not something that's going on the site. I'm keeping this, but this is one of Nico Clo's books that he put out. He didn't write this one, but it's all Japanese true crime cases, and I've been using this sort of as like a study guide for some cases I didn't know about. A lot of the Japanese cases, there's items that are very hard to find, or they're not super common, obviously, out here. With Om Shinrikyo and with Issei Sagawa, I've been lucky to be able to find a lot of pieces. It took a lot of research and time, but I've been able to find things and import things. But there's a lot of other cases that are there isn't really anything out there that I can tell. So I've been sort of had this on the desk for a while as like I said, a bit of a study guide or a tool to do a bit more research into some of those cases because probably 60 to 70% of the time that I'm working, I'm doing research, trying to find specific items or learning about new cases and things like that. And the rest of the time is packing and shipping and organization and inventory and things like that. But I tend to have like a lot of stuff on the desk that I'm using to actively kind of do work and research. I mean, this book that I showed earlier too, which is just sitting here in this pile, it's just a paperback that I got at a thrift store. But whenever I find at used bookstores or thrift stores, whenever I find a more rare book or a very good price on an interesting book, I'll pick that up too for the site. Those are sort of like the I guess more entry level collecting things like newspapers or magazines or paperbacks, items that aren't directly from a case or directly associated with an inmate. They tend to be they have more of a broad appeal. So I always like trying to look for items like that.
Is that written by one of the former members?
Yeah, Mark Beralt. Sorry, I might be pronouncing that wrong. I believe Mark Beralt was uh, involved with the Branch Davidians in some capacity, and I think Martin King is the author here. But see, this is, as you can see here, it costs $2. It's a good deal for the book, and then I'll sell it for 5 to 10, depending on the shipping weight and everything. And it's just little things like this I like to pick up. Not everybody that comes to the site wants to spend hundreds of dollars, right? They might want a smaller little item or a couple of stickers or something. So I like to have a real range and variety of items.
I got you. I've become obsessed with Waco.
Yeah, it's I have some T-shirts actually I can show. Just give me 1 second here.
It's become a topic in one of my classes because we started talking about in constitutional law. I'm a law professor, by the way. We started talking about whether or not, when should people just be allowed to be,
Yeah, that
and
was a big thing with that case for sure.
yeah, because that was a huge government mess.
Hmm.
And I mean, huge government mess. And um, yeah, it's interesting. But I talked to some people who are in prison, and I asked one of them. I was like, you got any cult members in there? Just so curious. And he was like, gang members are pretty much cult members in terms of prison. And I was like,
Yeah.
hook me up.
Hmm.
So I've started learning
Um,
about gang culture too.
yeah, for sure. There's definitely some crossover there. These are all T-shirts from the Waco siege. From um, during the siege, there was like a big um, sort of. Let me just hang this up in the background here for a second. There was a big um, how am I trying to say here? There was a big media camp where they had tents and everything, and I think it was 51 or 52 days of the siege. But they sold kind of merch there. People were sort of making novelty items and selling them up at the commotion that was happening there. So there's a bunch. I have a bunch of these vintage shirts from there that are um, fairly hard to come by. The thing with these is that they end up kind of crossing between true crime and between vintage collectors. A lot of people who like vintage T-shirts. It's a huge industry, so there's a lot of sort of value in certain ones from those people. Um, I think there's six. I think I have 6 or 7 right now. I've had a lot of other ones in the past, but this sort of crosses over a bit into um, in the same way as a rare true crime book has value for book collectors as well. These shirts have value for vintage clothing collectors and dealers, and I think they're very cool because they came from that initial sort of media circus and that standoff thing. People were selling these as novelty items. I get emails from people now and then who find them thrifting in and around Texas, or somebody has an estate sale and they had one of these because they went and purchased it there. I think they're very cool items.
I think it's very cool.
Is it true that Timothy McVeigh was handing out like propaganda pamphlets at the Waco siege?
Yeah, Timothy McVeigh. The Waco siege was sort of part of the thing that inspired it was Ruby Ridge, right? And then part of the thing that inspired Heaven's Gate, weirdly enough, was the Waco siege. But Timothy McVeigh, obviously the Oklahoma City bombing, he was at um, the siege at one point. There's a photo of him sitting on the back of his car with some bumper stickers that he had for sale. I don't know if he had pamphlets. I know he was selling some right wing bumper stickers, and then a certain time after the Waco siege was the Oklahoma City bombing. But yeah, both of those events were kind of heavily inspired from Ruby Ridge, and then, like I said, Heaven's Gate sort of started speaking about exiting their vehicles, as they called it, around the time when the Waco siege happened, when they were thinking, people might come and try and take some of our rights away, like they did in these situations. So we need to be prepared for that.
Yeah, I saw some footage recently that was from Waco, and I saw Timothy McVeigh's footage, and I was like, wait a minute, I didn't even know that.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
remember
there's,
I was an adult during Waco.
yeah. It's a very strange kind of thing. I've always thought that those stickers that he sold would have been a extremely rare sort of collectible, because there are stickers made by Timothy McVeigh and sold at the Waco siege. You kind of have two cases in one. But I've never ever seen one for sale. I think it's one of those things that's too obscure of an item. He had like 50 bumper stickers in 1993 or whenever it was. Like, it's going to be a hard thing to track down.
Oh, it'd be wild though.
Yeah,
Be hard to
yeah. I've had a few bumper stickers.
verify.
Yeah, yeah. That's another thing too. There's a lot of in verifying any of this stuff. There's a lot of things that are sort of circumstantial. Like, you have to have contextual clues and put a few things together. I'm very strict with what I put on the site. I had to have all the backstory and information. I had to have done my own research personally. There's a lot of things that I had to dig into when it comes to verification for a lot of items. But that's one where it would be like, how would you have the story there?
Right. I've always wanted to see somebody do a documentary on the Waco kids and the Manson family kids.
Yeah. There's even Heaven's Gate too. If you're not to derail what you're saying, but there were a lot of members that left to join Heaven's Gate in the '70s who abandoned their families and abandoned their kids. So there's people out there too from. I think those two obviously have like some of the more well-known kids who were affected by these things, but there's a lot of other cases where they could evolve, um, where they could have a really compelling story based on people that were associated with the event.
That would be cool because the only thing, I mean, you don't see a whole lot by the kids of the people. I guess Carrie Rawson's kind of the most famous one.
Yeah.
I would like
Dennis Rader's daughter.
more of those.
Mm-hmm.
Not a fan of
I
hers
mean,
though.
she is Dennis Rader's daughter, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and then there's also, I know that Arthur Shawcross's daughter is somebody who's spoken about it.
Maggie.
I think too. There's a book that I found recently. It's pretty rare. One of the kids, the children of Fred and Rosemary West, they wrote a book. Uh, one of Ted Bundy's exes wrote a book, and one of his daughters was sort of involved with that a little bit.
I have
There's
that book. I have the first edition of that. That's one of my prized possessions.
mhm. Yeah, there's some of those. There's some stories out there for sure, and it's a combination of there aren't a ton of them out there, but also a lot of those books aren't necessarily super popular or well known, or there's independently published books that weren't super popular that have now become super rare that involve some of these family members that were affected, um, which is cool. Always cool to come across. I love coming across rare books because I mean I probably got. I can even maybe check here in regards to the amount of books that I have on the site right now. I have Let's see.
I'm gonna get Maggie to write a book.
146. Yeah, I've got 146 books right now based on that are. I try to kind of pick and choose more either signed books or more rare ones or interesting ones. But even with that, there's like, how are you supposed to go through and find all this information? If my one small website has 146 different obscure true crime books, like how is there any chance for anybody to know of all of them or make some kind of complete list, or get all the information? A lot of information gets lost in the fact that there's so much media out there.
Yeah. I just think it's fascinating because I don't know, like I listened to Maggie talk about her dad. And I know she didn't grow up with him, but she still had just really amazing insight into him as a whole that we don't get from anything else.
Yeah. Who was her father? Sorry.
Arthur Shawcross.
Right. Right. Sorry. Yeah.
So Taylor, before we let you go, is there anything you want to like promote or plug that you're working on right now?
I mean, just the site, cultcollectibles.org. I think a lot of people don't realize it's just me doing everything. I was doing a lot of YouTube content for a while, but my YouTube was not eligible to be monetized, and I was spending a ton of money that didn't really translate to any sales. Not that it's all about sales, but some people were upset I stopped making kind of unboxing videos, so I just didn't have the time to do it if I want to keep running the website, right? So cultcollectibles.org is sort of the hub for everything. Um, I've been doing a lot of shorter videos, a lot of reels and stuff on Instagram and TikTok and my YouTube just to sort of show interesting items as they're coming in, which I think is cool because a lot of people are interacting with that and saying, "Oh, I've never seen those before. I'm interested in that piece." So I am doing some kind of social media stuff right now with that. I definitely don't do too much anymore. I used to do kind of vlog things too, but now it's mostly almost all my time is spent on sourcing for the website and then behind the scenes stuff to either acquire collections or archive things or um, get this new information out there. So yeah, there's not really any big things upcoming. There's a few really big collections I'm buying soon. Hopefully that will be coming to the site, but I'd say just check the site because you know the main goal is to buy as much stuff as I can, put as many things up there as I can, um, archive as much stuff as I can. Yeah, my socials, sometimes they'll get taken down. But check out cultcollectibles.org. And yeah, that's sort of the central spot if you're interested in the stuff I'm doing.
All right, sweet. Well, thank you for coming on today. We greatly appreciate it, and it's always fun to talk to you. And like I said, I'm definitely going to be in your neck of the woods in the next year or so tops, and we can hang out and trade stories and all that good shit.
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry, I was looking at your website. I was checking out the price of some of the
Yeah.
people I know.
Yeah.
Wayne's
Well,
got some
yeah.
funny stuff.
Thanks for your time, two of you. Appreciate it.
All right,
Yes,
thanks,
thank
Taylor.
you.
Yeah. You guys have a good one.
All right, you
You
too.
too.
Take care.
Andrew, do you have anything of Wayne's?
No, I don't actually. I I'll tell you something when we're not on live sometime. That I used to have of his. I wrote him a letter back in 2010 or 11, and he wrote me back, but I kind of deceived him. I don't even know if he would remember me doing so, but I'll tell you another time when we're not on live because I'm kind of ashamed of it. I was like 19 or 20 at the time. I totally deceived him, and he totally bought into it. I didn't think that he would, but I feel bad now looking back, But I'm like, I was 19 or 20. I was just a young and dumb kid.
You know what? You're probably not the only one. He's I don't know. I feel like he gets easily deceived anyhow from people.
Yeah, yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, his case is so huge that I'm sure people, I mean, people write as females all the time that are males, and males write as females. I'm sure you know that, to get letters and artwork and all that shit.
That's so weird to me.